Story. Struggling dad laughed at for inheriting Junkyard until Rare WWII Planes worth $15 million uncovered. The first light of dawn did little to cheer the cramped kitchen. It was a tired, gray light that seemed to merely highlight the peeling paint on the window frame and the faint spiderweb of cracks in the linoleum floor. For Liam Carter, it was simply a signal that the daily battle had begun. He stood before the open refrigerator, its low hum a constant, mournful companion in the quiet house. The bare shelves stared back at him. One carton of milk, about a quarter full, a half stick of butter, and in the egg tray, 2 lonely eggs. His shoulders slumped. It would have to be enough. "Morning, Daddy," a small voice chirped from the doorway. Liam turned, and the heavy mask of worry he wore dissolved instantly, replaced by a smile that was genuine, if a little weary. Chloe stood there, her blonde hair a chaotic halo around her head, clutching a well-loved teddy bear whose button eyes had been sewn on 3 different times. At 8 years old, she possessed a resilience that humbled him. "Morning, my little pumpkin," he said, his voice a warm rumble. "I hope you're hungry. I'm making the breakfast of champions today." Chloe's eyes lit up. "Pancakes?" Liam's heart gave a slight pang. "Even better. Scrambled eggs, cooked with the secret Carter technique." The secret technique was simply splitting their meager resources. He cracked both eggs into a bowl, added a splash of the precious milk, and whisked them with a fork. He sliced a single, thin strip of bacon into tiny pieces and fried them until crisp, letting the fat render out to cook the eggs in. It was a trick his own mother had taught him, a sleight of hand to make a little seem like a lot. As they ate at the wobbly kitchen table, Chloe chattered away, her world a vibrant tapestry of schoolyard stories, dreams about puppies, and detailed plans for the magnificent castle she was designing in her sketchbook. "And it will have a tower, Daddy, all the way up to the clouds, and a flag with a unicorn on it, and we'll live there, and you won't have to go to the factory anymore." Liam listened, nodding and smiling, forcing down his own portion so there would be more for her. He looked at her worn-out sneakers by the door, the soles thinning dangerously. He thought of the stack of brown-windowed envelopes tucked behind the fruit bowl, each one a paper and ink monster. He looked at his daughter's bright, hopeful face and felt a familiar, suffocating mix of fierce love and crushing inadequacy. "That sounds like the best castle in the world, sweetie," he said, reaching across the table to brush a crumb from her cheek. One day, the 2 most hopeful and hopeless words in his vocabulary. An hour later, Chloe was safely at school, and Liam was standing outside the First Community Bank of Northwood. The building was made of imposing red brick and dark glass, designed to look solid and permanent, everything Liam's life was not. In his hand, he clutched a letter from them, the paper already soft and creased from being read and reread a dozen times. His work shirt was clean, but frayed at the collar, his jeans faded. He felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a world he didn't belong in. Taking a breath that did nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird in his chest, he pushed open the heavy glass door. The air inside was cool and silent, smelling of money and antiseptic. A few tellers served customers with quiet efficiency. At the back, behind a large mahogany desk, sat Mr. Henderson. He was a man in his 70s, with thin white hair combed precisely over a scalp that was just as pale. He didn't look up as Liam approached, his attention fixed on the computer monitor before him. "Liam," he said, his voice flat. "It wasn't a question." "Mr. Henderson," Liam began, his own voice sounding thin. I got your letter. I came to talk about the mortgage." Finally, Henderson looked up. His eyes were a pale, dispassionate blue like chips of winter ice. "There's not much to talk about, is there? The numbers are quite clear. You're 3 months behind. This is the 3rd time in 2 years." "I know, sir. I'm sorry. Things at the plant. They cut my hours again, but I'm picking up odd jobs. I'm trying. I just need a little more time, an extension, anything." Liam hated the pleading tone in his voice, the way it made him feel small and childish. Henderson sighed, a small, irritated puff of air. He turned back to his screen and tapped a few keys. "An extension, Liam, is just a delay of the inevitable. You're what the system calls a non-performing asset. It's not personal, it's just business." He swiveled his chair back around and slid a single, crisp sheet of paper across the polished surface of the desk. "This is a formal, 30-day notice of foreclosure. If you cannot produce the full arrears plus the current month's payment within 30 days, the bank will initiate proceedings to reclaim the property. I suggest you start making alternative arrangements." The words hit Liam with a physical force. 30 days. The paper felt impossibly heavy, its sharp edges a threat. He stared at it, the black, emotionless print blurring before his eyes. This wasn't just a house, it was Chloe's home, the only one she'd ever known. "Please, Mr. Henderson," Liam whispered. "Isn't there anything you can do?" "My job," Henderson said, his voice turning cold, "is to protect the bank's investments, not to subsidize poor financial planning." He picked up a pen and began signing a document, a clear dismissal. The walk out of the bank was a walk of shame. The sun seemed too bright, the sounds of the town too loud. He got into his old pickup truck, the engine groaning to life like an old man getting out of a chair. As he drove home, the foreclosure notice sat on the passenger seat, a death sentence for the life he'd tried so hard to build. Pulling into his driveway, his despair was immediately compounded by the sight of his neighbor, Gary, polishing the chrome grille of a brand new, oversized SUV. Gary was a man who measured his success by the shine on his possessions and the failures of others. He looked up as Liam's sputtering truck came to a stop, a smirk already playing on his lips. "Tough day at the office, Carter?" Gary called out, his voice carrying easily across the patchy lawns that separated their properties. "Or is that what you call few employment these days?" Liam ignored him, killing the engine and focusing on the front door of his house. He just wanted to get inside. "You know," Gary continued, wiping a non-existent speck of dust from his bumper, "I hear they're hiring down at the car wash. Might be more your speed. No heavy thinking involved." Liam's hands clenched into fists on the steering wheel. He could feel the hot flare of anger in his chest. But then he thought of Chloe, of the example he had to set. He took a slow, deep breath, got out of the truck, and walked towards his house without a word. Gary's derisive laughter followed him all the way to the door. Inside, the house was quiet again. He tossed his keys on the counter and sank onto a kitchen chair, the foreclosure notice lying before him like a snake. 30 days. How was he supposed to come up with nearly $4,000 in 30 days? It might as well have been $4 million. He buried his face in his hands, the rough calluses of his palms scraping against his skin. For the first time, he felt truly, utterly hopeless. He had failed. He sat there for a long time, lost in a silent storm of panic and shame, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. He was so lost in his thoughts that the shrill ring of the landline phone made him jump. He stared at it. No one ever called the landline. It was a relic, kept only because it was part of a cheap internet bundle. It rang again, insistent. Wiping a hand over his tired face, he picked it up. "Hello? Am I speaking with Mr. Liam Carter?" The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, and unfamiliar. "Yes, this is he. Mr. Carter, my name is Samuel Finch. I'm an attorney with the firm Finch, Gable, and Stern in Crestwood County. I'm calling you regarding the estate of your father, Earl Carter." Liam froze. His father. He hadn't spoken to his father in over 15 years, not since a bitter fight had severed their already frayed connection. The man was a ghost, a half-forgotten memory of grease-stained hands and a silent, brooding presence. "My father?" Liam repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," the lawyer said, his tone unchanging. "I'm sorry to have to inform you of this over the phone, but we were unable to find any closer next of kin. Your father passed away 3 days ago." The news didn't bring grief. It brought a strange, hollow numbness. A door to a part of his life he had sealed shut had just been blown off its hinges. "Oh," was all Liam could manage. "Mr. Carter," the lawyer continued, "I am the executor of his will. It seems you are his sole beneficiary. He has left you his entire estate." "Emsit." Liam let out a short, bitter laugh. "His estate? You mean a cabin full of junk and a mountain of debt?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "He has left you his property, yes, a 12-acre lot on the old county road." "The junkyard," Liam clarified, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "As you say," the lawyer replied, unfazed. "We'll need you to come to our office next week to sign the paperwork and take possession." "Mr. Carter, are you still there?" Liam was there, but his mind was reeling. He was staring at the foreclosure notice on his table, a document that represented the end of his world. And now, this, a phone call from a stranger telling him he had inherited the very monument to failure and neglect that had defined his father's life. A junkyard. It felt like the universe was telling a cruel, elaborate joke, and he was the punchline. Yes, he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. I'm here. He hung up the phone and stood in the deepening gloom of his kitchen. The word the lawyer had used echoed in the silence, a word so absurd, so out of place in his life, that it seemed to shimmer with a mad light of its own. Inheritance. The drive out of Northwood was a journey backward in time. With every mile that put the town behind them, Liam felt the sterile despair of the bank and the sting of Gary's ridicule recede, only to be replaced by a deeper, older ache. It was the ache of his childhood. He gripped the steering wheel of his truck, his knuckles white, as Chloe sat beside him, humming a tuneless song and tracing patterns on the dusty dashboard. To her, this was an adventure. To him, it was an exhumation. He remembered this road. The asphalt gave way to packed gravel 2 miles back, and the truck's tires crunched a rhythmic, gritty protest. This was his father's territory. Earl Carter had never been comfortable in town. He was a man of the fringe, physically and emotionally. Liam's memories of him weren't of hugs or bedtime stories, but of the sharp, metallic scent of rust and oil that clung to his clothes and the sight of his calloused hands, which could coax a dead engine back to life, but were clumsy and hesitant in any form of gentle contact. Did Grandpa live here a long time? Chloe asked, her voice cutting through Liam's reverie. All his life, I think, Liam answered, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Well, all my life anyway. Were you friends? The question was so simple, so innocent, yet it landed like a stone in Liam's gut. Friends? He and his father had been like two celestial bodies trapped in the same orbit, close enough to feel each other's gravity but never touching. He was busy, Liam said, the words feeling inadequate. He had a lot of projects. That was the word Earl had always used. Projects. It was a vague, all-encompassing term for the endless parade of broken things he'd haul home in his own battered truck. Defunct tractors, mangled farm equipment, cars that were little more than metal skeletons. Liam had grown up amidst a symphony of grinding metal and spitting welders, always feeling like he was second place to a piece of scrap. They rounded a final bend, and there it was. A towering wall of corrugated iron and chain-link fencing, topped with coils of rusted barbed wire. A large metal gate, sagging on its hinges, barred the entrance. A faded wooden sign hung crookedly from one post, the words barely legible. Carter's Salvage. Liam pulled the truck to a stop, the engine sputtering into silence. For a long moment, they just stared. It wasn't a property, it was a scar on the landscape. A tidal wave of rust-colored decay seemed frozen in time, threatening to spill over the fences and consume the green woods that surrounded it. Whoa, Chloe breathed, her face pressed against the window. It's like a kingdom of sleeping giants. Before Liam could respond, the sound of another engine broke the stillness. He glanced in his rearview mirror and his heart sank. A gleaming, cherry-red SUV was pulling up behind them. Gary. Of course, Gary got out, leaving his own engine running, and strolled towards them with a proprietary air, as if he were inspecting a new addition to his neighborhood. He peered over Liam's truck bed at the gate, then back at Liam, a look of profound, mocking pity on his face. Well, I'll be, he drawled, his voice thick with false sympathy. I had to see it to believe it. This is it, huh? The big inheritance, old Earl's Fort Knox. He let out a loud, barking laugh that echoed in the sepulchral silence. Looks like he left you exactly what he was. A whole lot of nothing. Liam felt a hot flush of shame crawl up his neck. He wanted to say something, to defend the father he barely knew, to defend himself. But what could he say? Gary was right. It was a whole lot of nothing. He turned his face forward, focusing on the rusted latch of the gate. Gary took his silence as a victory. Listen, Carter, he said, leaning conspiratorially on Liam's door. I might be willing to help you out. I could bring a crew out here, haul all this junk away for you. For a fee, of course. Clean the slate. It's the neighborly thing to do. The offer was so condescending, so predatory, that it snapped Liam out of his stupor. He turned and met Gary's gaze, his own eyes cold and hard. Thanks, Gary, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But I think I can handle my own family's business. Surprised by the flash of steel in Liam's voice, Gary blinked and took a step back. He shrugged, a smirk returning to his face. Suit yourself. Don't come crying to me when you get tetanus. He sauntered back to his pristine vehicle, revved the engine unnecessarily, and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Liam watched him go, his hands trembling slightly. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. He looked at Chloe, who was watching him with wide, concerned eyes. He forced a smile. Come on, let's go see our kingdom. The gate's lock was a massive, ancient thing, but it had been well oiled. A key, given to him by the lawyer, turned with a satisfying clunk. With a collective grunt, he and Chloe managed to swing the heavy gate inward, its hinges groaning in protest. They stepped inside. If it looked overwhelming from the outside, it was suffocating from within. Mountains of scrap metal soared towards the sky, casting long, jagged shadows. The skeletal remains of dozens of cars lay half-buried in the weeds, their empty windows like vacant eyes. Paths, barely discernible, wound their way through the labyrinth of debris. Liam's heart, which had been buoyed by a tiny, irrational flicker of hope, sank back into the familiar pit of his stomach. This was worse than he had imagined. It wasn't an asset, it was an environmental disaster. It would cost a fortune to clear. His father hadn't left him a nest egg, he'd left him a bill. But as Liam stood frozen by despair, Chloe had already ventured forward. Her imagination, unburdened by mortgages and foreclosures, saw something entirely different. "Daddy, look!" she called out, her voice full of excitement. She was standing beside a colossal engine block, its tangle of pipes and wires resembling the console of a spaceship. She pressed a loose bolt. Beep boop, engaging hyperdrive. She darted away, scrambling up a precarious pile of old tires. "I'm the queen of the castle," she declared from the top, her arms raised in triumph. Liam watched her, a faint smile touching his lips despite himself. He began to walk, following the winding path deeper into the yard. He saw what Gary saw. Junk, rot, failure. But as he watched his daughter, he started to see it through her eyes, just for a moment. A stack of rusted barrels became a fortress wall. A long, bent piece of sheet metal was a dragon's wing. Chloe suddenly stopped, crouching low to the ground near the rusted-out husk of an old washing machine. She beckoned to him silently, her finger to her lips. Liam walked over quietly and peered over her shoulder. Tucked inside the machine's hollow drum, sheltered from the elements, was a perfect, intricately woven bird's nest. 4 tiny sky-blue eggs lay nestled within. As they watched, the mother finch returned, a twig in her beak. She regarded them with a wary, black bead eye before settling gently over her clutch. Life, a small, defiant spark of warmth and creation in the very heart of all this cold decay. It was a tiny, perfect thing, a secret kept safe amidst the chaos. Liam felt a strange lump form in his throat. "We have to protect them, Daddy," Chloe whispered, her voice full of awe. "We will," Liam whispered back. They left the nest in peace and continued their exploration. The sheer scale of the place was staggering. It wasn't just cars and tractors. There were airplane parts, boat hulls, and machinery Liam couldn't even identify. How had one man accumulated all this? Tucked away at the very back of the property, almost completely swallowed by overgrown ivy and a leaning tower of scrap, they found it. A small, dilapidated cabin. The roof sagged in the middle, and the windows were grimy with years of dirt. A crooked porch held a single, splintered rocking chair, which swayed slightly in the breeze like a lonely ghost. This was where his father had lived. This was the nerve center of the whole operation. A narrow, trodden path led to the front door. Liam felt a sudden, intense reluctance. Crossing that threshold felt like a final, irrevocable step into his father's world. A world he had spent his entire adult life trying to escape. He could almost smell it from here, the familiar scent of old paper, stale coffee, and motor oil that had been the permanent aroma of his childhood. Chloe, however, felt no such hesitation. She ran up the 2 porch steps and tried the doorknob. "It's locked, Daddy." Liam walked up beside her, his feet heavy. The wood of the porch groaned under his weight. He pulled the ring of keys from his pocket, the one from the lawyer. There were only 3, one for the gate, one that looked like a standard house key, and a small, strange one. He took the house key and slid it into the lock. It was stiff, but with a bit of force it turned. He put his hand on the knob, pausing for a fraction of a second. He was about to confront the ghost of Earl Carter. He wasn't sure he was ready. Taking one last look at the chaotic kingdom of rust his father had built, he turned the knob, pushed the door inward, and stepped out of the light and into the shadows of his father's life. The air that greeted them as they stepped inside the cabin was thick and still, a preserved atmosphere of solitude. It smelled overwhelmingly of three things: the bitter tang of cold coffee, the sharp scent of lubricating oil, and the dry, dusty sweetness of old paper. A layer of dust coated every surface, but beneath it, Liam was struck by an immediate and baffling contradiction. The junkyard outside was a monument to chaos, but this small cabin was a bastion of meticulous, almost obsessive order. He had expected squalor. He'd braced himself for piles of dirty clothes and greasy plates. Instead, the single room was arranged with a mechanic's precision. Tools weren't just thrown in a box. They lined the walls on pegboards, their outlines traced in black marker, each wrench and screwdriver in its designated place. The small kitchenette had counters that were cluttered but not dirty, holding strange-looking calibrated instruments alongside a clean coffee pot. It was the den of a man who lived and breathed his work. "It's a little dusty," Chloe said, wrinkling her nose but otherwise unfazed. She immediately gravitated toward a low shelf filled not with novels, but with thick, heavy technical manuals. The titles were gibberish to her, but the complex diagrams were fascinating. Pratt & Whitney R 2800 Double Wasp, an operational history, principles of aeronautical engineering, airframe and power plant mechanics general handbook. Liam's mission was simple and grim. He wasn't here to reminisce. He was here to find anything that could be converted into cash. He needed a miracle in the form of a forgotten bank book, a wad of bills stuffed in a mattress, or the deed to a piece of land that wasn't a toxic waste site. He started with the most obvious place: the small, scarred wooden desk in the corner. The drawers didn't stick. They slid open smoothly on well-greased runners. The first one contained not letters or bills, but a series of drafting tools, compasses, protractors, and rulers of varying sizes, all nestled in custom-cut foam. The second drawer held stacks of large rolled-up papers, secured with rubber bands that were still pliable. Liam unrolled the first one. It was a blueprint, a complex and beautiful schematic of a radial engine with thousands of tiny parts rendered in perfect, crisp blue lines. Notes were scribbled in the margins in his father's cramped, precise handwriting. A wave of frustration washed over Liam. Blueprints and old books wouldn't stop the bank from taking his house. He began searching more urgently, his movements becoming brisk and angry. He checked under the lumpy mattress on the narrow bed, nothing but dust bunnies. He looked inside the coffee can on the counter. It was full of miscellaneous screws and washers, sorted by size. He pulled open a large, flat file cabinet, and this was where he found his father's true obsession. It was filled with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of manila folders, each one neatly labeled. He pulled one out at random. P51, D Mustang Cockpit Instrumentation Wiring. Inside were dozens of pages of diagrams, historical photos, and handwritten notes on restoration techniques. Another folder, Supermarine Spitfire Mike 9th Merlin Engine Fuel Pump Assembly. It was all junk. It was his father's entire life, a catalog of junk. As his hands brushed against the cool, dry paper of a schematic, a bitter memory surfaced. So sharp and clear it felt like it happened yesterday. He was 16. It was the championship baseball game, and he was pitching. He'd told his father about it for weeks. Earl had promised, for once, to be there. Liam had stood on the mound, and between every pitch, he'd scanned the bleachers, looking for that familiar, weathered face. But the seat his mother had saved remained empty. He'd gone home that night, the cheap plastic trophy for second place feeling like a block of lead in his hand. He'd found his father in the garage, hunched over a corroded piece of metal, a welding torch spitting blue fire beside him. "You promised," Liam had yelled, his voice cracking with teenage betrayal. "It was the championship. You promised you'd come." Earl had looked up slowly, pushing his protective goggles onto his forehead. His face was smudged with grease, his eyes tired. "I'm sorry, son," he'd said, his voice raspy. "I ran into a problem with this manifold. I couldn't leave it." "Oh, it's always something," Liam had shot back, tears of anger and hurt blurring his vision. "It's always a piece of junk. You always choose this trash over me. You care more about this scrap metal than you do about your own family." He'd never forgotten the look on his father's face. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper. A flash of profound pain that was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, hidden once again behind a mask of weary indifference. "It's not junk, Liam," was all he had said before turning back to his work. They had barely spoken after that. The final, irreparable fight that led to Liam leaving home for good had been just an echo of that same argument. Standing here now in his father's silent cabin, surrounded by the very things that had torn them apart, Liam felt a hollow ache. He slammed the file drawer shut, the metallic bang echoing in the small space. It was hopeless. While Liam was lost in the past, Chloe was engaged in a quiet exploration of her own. She had tired of the dusty books and was now investigating a cluttered corner behind the rocking chair. Tucked under a pile of old canvases, she found a wooden footlocker. It wasn't locked. "Daddy, what's this?" she called out. Liam turned, his foul mood momentarily broken by her curiosity. He knelt beside her as she lifted the heavy lid. The chest was filled with more of Earl's personal effects, but these were different. They weren't technical. At the top lay a neatly folded dark blue uniform. It was old, made of thick wool. Beneath it, Liam found a small box containing military medals and, at the very bottom, a framed photograph. Chloe picked it up and wiped the dust from the glass with her sleeve. "Who's this?" Liam took the frame from her. The man in the black and white photograph was young, probably no older than 20. He wore a crisp U.S. Army Air Forces uniform, a confident, easy smile on his face, his eyes bright with a light Liam had never seen in them. He stood with his arm around another man, older but with the same strong jawline Liam's grandfather. Behind them stood the nose of a B-17 bomber. This was Earl Carter, but it was a version of him that was a complete stranger to Liam. This was a young man from before the junkyard, before the silence, before the crushing weight of his obsession had settled over him. This was a man who had flown, who had served, who had smiled. He turned the frame over. A small inscription was taped to the back, written in his grandmother's elegant cursive. "Earl and his father, RAF Molesworth, England, 1944. My brave boys." His grandfather had died in the war. Liam knew that much. But his father had never, not once, spoken of his own time in the service. He'd never mentioned being in England or working on bombers. It was a part of his life he had completely erased. Liam stared at the photograph, a disorienting sense of confusion warring with the old resentment. The man in this picture didn't fit the narrative Liam had built over a lifetime. The reclusive, emotionally stunted junkman had once been this smiling, hopeful soldier. What had happened to him? What had turned that bright young man into the ghost who haunted these 12 acres? He was so absorbed in the photo that he didn't notice Chloe had gotten restless and wandered back outside. The silence of the cabin was suddenly broken by her voice. Not a shout of play, but a cry of surprise. "Daddy, whoa!" Liam's heart leaped into his throat. He shot up, the photograph still in his hand, and bolted out the door, his mind instantly flashing to images of her falling from a pile of scrap or cutting herself on sharp metal. He found her 20 yards from the cabin, near a massive, dense mound of earth and debris that was so overgrown with thorny vines it looked like a natural hill. She was on her hands and knees, peering at the ground. "Chloe, are you okay? What happened?" he panted, rushing to her side. "I'm okay," she said, looking up at him, her eyes wide with discovery, not fear. "I was chasing a lizard, and I tripped on a root, and look," she pointed. Liam's eyes followed her finger. At the base of the mound, where her fall had scraped away a thick carpet of moss and dirt, something was visible. It wasn't a rock or a root. It was a perfectly straight, hard edge of dark, rusted metal. It was the corner of something man-made, something buried. Curiosity overpowering his parental alarm, Liam knelt beside her. He used his hands to tear away more of the vines and claw at the damp earth. The patch of exposed metal grew larger. It wasn't just a piece of scrap. It was flat, thick, and unyielding. After a few minutes of frantic digging, he uncovered more of it. A large, recessed metal ring, a handle, clearly designed for lifting. It was a door, a hatch, set horizontally into a solid concrete slab that had been deliberately and painstakingly concealed beneath tons of earth and junk. They both fell back, sitting on the ground, staring at their discovery. This wasn't on any map of the property. It was a secret. His father, a man of a million tiny, meticulously cataloged secrets in his cabin, had one more. A big one. Liam looked from the impossible door back to the cabin, then down at the photograph still clutched in his hand. The smiling soldier, the obsessive mechanic, the reclusive junkman. It was all starting to feel like pieces of a puzzle he was only just beginning to comprehend. And he had a growing suspicion that the biggest piece of all lay right beneath their feet. The discovery of the hatch transformed the junkyard from a place of despair into a place of profound mystery. Liam's exhaustion was replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a frantic energy that bordered on obsession. This was it. Whatever his father's life had truly been about, Liam felt certain the answer was on the other side of that slab of metal. Getting it open, however, proved to be a formidable challenge. "We just need to pull really hard, Daddy," Chloe suggested, her small hands wrapped around the cold, rusted ring alongside his. They pulled. They grunted. The hatch didn't move a millimeter. It was as if it were fused to the concrete. Liam spent the next hour in a frenzy of activity. He fetched a long, heavy crowbar from the cabin's pegboard wall. He wedged the tip into the hairline crack between the metal door and its concrete frame and threw his entire weight against it. The crowbar bent with a groan of protesting steel. The hatch remained sealed. He found a sledgehammer. The rhythmic, deafening clang of steel on steel echoed across the silent junkyard, startling a flock of crows from a nearby heap of wreckage. The blows only managed to chip the concrete and leave shallow, concave dents in the thick metal plate. Liam was sweating, his arms aching, his knuckles raw where he'd scraped them. Defeated for the moment, he slumped to the ground, panting. His gaze fell upon the reason for his failure, an obstacle he hadn't even noticed in his initial excitement. Set flush into the face of the hatch was a circular combination lock, a heavy-duty, industrial model. Its surface was oxidized and pitted, but the numbers on the dial were still visible beneath the grime. It was locked. Of course it was locked. His father had sealed his greatest secret with more than just dirt and steel. "We need a code," Chloe said, stating the obvious with a child's simple logic. Liam nodded, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He must have written it down somewhere, and, oh. The thought sent them scrambling back to the cabin. But this time, their search was different. They were no longer looking for cash. They were on a treasure hunt, searching for a sequence of numbers, a key to unlock the heart of the entire property. They turned the small cabin upside down. Liam had thought his first search was thorough, but now he was looking with new eyes. He tapped the walls, searching for hollow spots. He lifted the floorboards beneath the bed. He checked inside the hollowed-out casings of old radios and between the pages of every technical manual. Nothing. Chloe, meanwhile, was conducting her own investigation. She emptied the pockets of Earl's old work coats hanging by the door, finding only a few stray nuts, a lint-covered peppermint, and a folded receipt for spark plugs dated 1997. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the grimy windows, Liam's frantic energy gave way to a familiar, creeping frustration. It was another dead end. Another one of his father's frustrating, impossible puzzles with no solution. He slumped into the worn armchair by the desk, the springs groaning in protest. Was this whole thing just another one of Earl's cruel, silent jokes? It was then that he noticed the drawer. The desk had 3 drawers on the right-hand side. He'd searched them all. But his eyes now fell on the wooden panel below them, near the floor. It looked like a solid piece of the desk's structure, a simple, decorative base. But something about it seemed off. A faint, almost invisible seam ran along its top edge. It was too perfect, too straight. His heart began to beat a little faster. He knelt, his fingers tracing the seam. There was no knob, no handle. He pushed on it, tapped it, nothing. He ran his hand along the underside, and his fingers brushed against a tiny, recessed latch. He flicked it. With a quiet click, the panel swung forward on hidden hinges, revealing a shallow, secret compartment. And inside, there was only one thing, a thick, leather-bound journal. It was heavy in his hands, the leather worn smooth with time and use. It felt important. This was it. He knew it. He sat back in the armchair, Chloe coming to lean against his knee, and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was the same cramped, precise script from the blueprints, but the words were different. This wasn't technical data. This was a man's soul. The 12th of October, 1985. I found her today, tucked away in the back of a farmer's barn in Ohio, forgotten by the world. The Allison engine is seized, and the port wing is damaged, but the fuselage is sound. The lines of her, they are as perfect as the day she rolled out of the factory. She is a true lady, AP 51. My father would have wept to see her. Bringing her home will be the hardest part. No one can know. Liam read on, utterly engrossed. Page after page detailed a secret life he could never have imagined. Earl wrote about his project with the passion and reverence of a religious zealot. He wasn't collecting junk. He was rescuing history. He was a secret curator, a one-man preservation society. The journal chronicled clandestine late-night trips across the country, elaborate bartering deals with scrap dealers and farmers, and the immense logistical challenges of transporting massive, multi-ton pieces of aviation history back to his 12-acre sanctuary without raising suspicion. He referred to the planes not as objects, but as living things. He wrote of the day he acquired the British lady, a Spitfire he'd traded for a fully restored vintage tractor, a deal that had taken him 2 years to negotiate. He detailed finding the bent-wing bird, the Corsair, in a scrapyard in Arizona, saving it from being melted down into ingots just days before the furnace was fired up. But threaded between the technical details of engine restoration and fuselage repair was a deep, painful vein of personal regret. May 2nd, 1995. Liam made the honor roll again. His mother sent me a newspaper clipping. He's so smart, he has her brightness. He doesn't have this grease in his blood, this obsession with the past. I should have called him. But what would I say? I tried to work on the Corsair's landing gear assembly instead. It's easier to fix what's broken when it's made of steel. Liam felt a tightness in his chest. He read about his own birthdays, missed holidays, and school events, all mentioned with a brevity that couldn't conceal the underlying sorrow. His father hadn't been indifferent. He had been trapped. He was a man possessed by a mission he felt powerless to abandon, a mission he clearly believed was more important than anything, yet he was tormented by the price it cost him. June 20, 2005. Liam came by today. He's a man now. He has a daughter, Chloe, my granddaughter. He yelled at me. He said the same things he always has, that I chose this place over him. He's not wrong, but he doesn't understand. This isn't for me. None of it is. This is a legacy. It's for the men who didn't come home, like my own father. It's for him, so he can have a foundation his father never could. One day, he'll see. Liam had to stop reading, his vision blurring with tears. The anger and resentment he had carried for so many years began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. It wasn't a choice between Junk and his son. It was a choice between his son and honoring a promise made to his own lost father, a promise that had consumed his entire life. He wiped his eyes and flipped towards the end of the journal, the pages becoming more sporadic. The final entries were frail, the handwriting shaky. And then he saw it, a short, simple entry, circled several times. My boy's best day. The one time I got it right. The 4th of October, 2098. The numbers leaped off the page. Liam's mind raced back in time. He remembered. He was turning 10 years old. He hadn't expected anything from his father, as usual. But that morning, Earl had been waiting for him, his hands clean for once. He hadn't gone to the junkyard. Instead, he'd driven Liam 3 hours to a regional airport where an air show was being held. It was the single, most vibrant memory he had of his father. They had stood together, necks craned towards the sky, as vintage warbirds roared overhead. His father, for the first and only time, had come alive. He'd pointed out each plane, naming them, explaining the sounds of their engines, his voice filled with a passion Liam had never heard before. He had bought Liam ice cream and a model airplane. He had been present. He had been a dad. It had been the best day. Liam looked at the numbers again. The month, the day, the year, 10/04/98, he whispered, his voice trembling with dawning realization. He looked at Chloe, who had been watching him, her small face a mirror of his own turbulent emotions. I think I know the code, he said. He closed the journal, placing it carefully on the desk. He stood up, his body thrumming with a new kind of energy. It wasn't the frantic, angry energy from before. This was a quiet, determined certainty. He was no longer just trying to break into a locked bunker. He was about to accept an inheritance he was finally beginning to understand. Together, he and Chloe walked back out into the twilight, toward the silent, waiting hatch, leaving the ghost in the cabin behind to go and meet the man. The world outside the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The sun had dipped below the jagged silhouette of the scrap heaps, painting the sky in deep hues of purple and orange. A profound stillness had settled over the junkyard, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the sound of Liam's and Chloe's footsteps on the gravel path. Liam carried a heavy flashlight from the cabin, its beam cutting a nervous bouncing path ahead of them. They arrived at the great metal hatch, which now seemed less like an obstacle and more like a gateway. In the fading light, it looked ancient and imposing, a tombstone for a lifetime of secrets. Liam knelt before the combination lock, his heart hammering against his ribs. The memory of that long-ago birthday was so vivid now, a single, bright island in a sea of gray childhood. He could almost smell the aviation fuel and the popcorn from the air show. His fingers, thick with calluses from his own hard life, felt clumsy as he gripped the cold, pitted dial. He wiped his dusty hand on his jeans and took a steadying breath. "Okay," he whispered, as much to himself as to Chloe, who stood beside him, a small, silent shadow. October 4th, 98. He turned the dial carefully, right to 10, left past 10, stopping on 4, right again to 98. On the final number, there was a faint, metallic whisper from within the lock mechanism, followed by a solid, deeply satisfying thunk. It was the most beautiful sound Liam had ever heard. He looked at Chloe, his eyes wide in the gloom. A huge grin spread across her face. Liam grabbed the recessed ring with both hands, his muscles tensing. He pulled. This time, there was no resistance, only weight. With a deep groan of long unused hinges and the hiss of a breaking air seal, the heavy hatch began to lift. A wave of cool, dry air washed over them, carrying a scent entirely different from the damp earth outside. It was the smell of concrete, canvas, and something else. A faint, clean smell of oil and preserved metal. It was the scent of a place sealed off from time. Liam propped the heavy door open with the sledgehammer he'd discarded earlier, ensuring it wouldn't slam shut. He peered down into the darkness. A steep set of concrete steps descended into blackness. "Stay right behind me," he said, his voice a low command. He switched on the flashlight, its powerful beam slicing into the subterranean void, and began the descent. The air grew cooler with every step. The sounds of the outside world faded away completely, replaced by the soft scuff of their shoes on the concrete and the echo of their own breathing. It felt like they were entering another world. After about 20 steps, they reached a flat, level floor. Liam swept the flashlight beam across the space. It was immense, far larger than he could have ever imagined. The beam caught on massive, shapeless forms, enormous ghosts shrouded in heavy, dun-colored canvas tarps. There were 3 of them, spaced evenly apart in the vast, echoing darkness. The sheer scale of them was staggering, dwarfing the cars and tractors in the yard above. His hand traced the cool, damp concrete wall, searching. He found what he was looking for, a bank of old-fashioned, heavy-duty electrical switches. His fingers hesitated for a moment. This was the point of no return. He was about to turn on the lights and see the full scope of his father's obsession, the legacy that had cost him everything. He flipped the first switch. Nothing. He flipped the second. The third. On the fourth, a low hum started somewhere deep in the bunker, and a single bare bulb flickered weakly at the far end of the room. It wasn't enough. He flipped the final, largest switch. With a loud clank and a shower of sparks, a series of industrial light fixtures, suspended high on the ceiling, sputtered to life one by one. They cast a harsh, yellow-white glare, chasing the shadows away and flooding the cavernous space with light. And they saw. Liam and Chloe both gasped, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the bunker. It wasn't a storage locker. It was a hangar. A pristine, secret, underground hangar. And the shrouded shapes weren't junk. They were airplanes. For a long moment, they could do nothing but stare, paralyzed by the sheer, magnificent impossibility of it all. The planes were colossal, their canvas coverings hinting at the powerful forms beneath. Liam felt a sense of reverence, as if he had stumbled into a pharaoh's tomb. He walked slowly toward the nearest one, Chloe trailing just behind him, her hand clutching the back of his shirt. He reached up and took a corner of the heavy canvas. It was dusty but dry. With a deep breath, he pulled. The tarp slid away with a soft, rasping sound, revealing the polished aluminum skin of an airplane. But it wasn't just any airplane. The iconic, streamlined fuselage, the bubble canopy, the four-bladed propeller. Liam knew it instantly from the air show all those years ago. It was a P-51 Mustang. It wasn't a wreck. It was perfect. The silver skin gleamed under the harsh lights, adorned with the star and bar insignia of the U.S. Army Air Forces. The name, Galloping Ghost, was painted elegantly on its nose. It looked alive, ready. "Daddy," Chloe whispered, her voice filled with a wonder that mirrored his own. Almost in a daze, Liam moved to the second shape. This one was different, more rounded. He and Chloe pulled the tarp away together. Beneath it rested a fighter plane with graceful, iconic, elliptical wings. A supermarine Spitfire. Its camouflage paint, a pattern of earthy greens and browns, was immaculate. The red, white, and blue roundel of the Royal Air Force stood out vividly on its wing. Liam felt lightheaded, a sense of vertigo washing over him. This was impossible. These planes belonged in museums, not hidden under a junkyard in the middle of nowhere. He stumbled toward the third and final shape, the largest of the three. His hands were trembling as he gripped the canvas. When he pulled this one away, he audibly gasped. The plane beneath was a monster, a brute of a machine with a massive radial engine and a huge three-bladed propeller. But its most defining feature was its wings. They were bent, cranked into an iconic, inverted gull-wing shape. An F-4U Corsair, the bent-wing bird from his father's journal. It was painted a deep naval blue, the paint so pristine it looked wet. Liam slowly circled the aircraft, his hand hovering just above the surface, afraid to touch it, afraid it might dissolve into dust, a mirage born of grief and hope. But it was real, solid. Three of the most legendary aircraft of the Second World War, hidden from the world, restored to a state of impossible perfection. At the back of the hangar, arranged with the same neatness as the cabin above, was a large workshop. Drill presses, lathes, and vast tool chests stood in silent testament to the thousands of hours of labor that had taken place here. On a long wooden workbench, a single object sat under a focus lamp, a gray metal box, like a footlocker for documents. Liam walked over to it and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in neat folders, were the plane's souls. For each aircraft, there was a complete set of original technical manuals, logbooks, and transfer of ownership papers dating back to their military decommissioning in the 1942nd and 52nd. There were binders filled with photographs, documenting every single step of the restoration process, from the rusted, derelict husks they had once been to the gleaming jewels they were now. He picked up a logbook for the Mustang. The final entry was dated just 2 months ago. Engine run-up complete. Oil pressure stable at 5,500 psi. She's ready. It all crashed down on Liam at once. The weight of the 30-day notice, the shame of his poverty, the years of anger at his father, the shocking, overwhelming reality of what lay before him. This wasn't a hobby. It wasn't an obsession. It was a life's work of singular, genius-level dedication. His father hadn't been a junkman hoarding scrap. He had been a master restorer, an artist working in aluminum and steel. He had been a guardian of history. All the anger, all the resentment he had carried for 15 years, shattered into a million pieces. It was replaced by a wave of understanding so powerful it buckled his knees. He slid down the leg of the workbench to the floor, the cold concrete a shock against his back. He put his head in his hands and began to laugh. It was a wild, unhinged sound, echoing strangely in the vast hangar. It was the laugh of a man who had been pushed to the absolute brink, only to discover that the ground beneath his feet was made of solid gold. The laughter choked, turned into a sob, then back into laughter. Chloe, who had been staring at the Corsair with wide-eyed wonder, came over and gently put her small hand on his shaking shoulder. "Are you okay, Daddy?" Liam looked up, his face streaked with tears, but his eyes shining with a light she hadn't seen in a very long time. He pulled her into a fierce hug, burying his face in her hair. "I'm better than okay, Pumpkin," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He held her tight, the two of them a small island of humanity in a cathedral of legendary machines. I finally understand. He finally understood what his father had been trying to build here, in secret, under the earth. It wasn't just a collection of airplanes, it was a foundation, a legacy. It was a second chance. The next morning, Liam woke up in his father's cabin, stiff and sore from a night spent on the lumpy mattress. For a disoriented moment, the crushing weight of the foreclosure notice settled back onto his chest. Then, memory flooded in the combination. The hatch, the impossible sight of 3 perfectly restored warbirds gleaming under the hangar lights. It felt like a fever dream. He had to be sure. Leaving Chloe sleeping soundly, bundled in an old army blanket, he walked out into the crisp morning air and descended the concrete steps once more. He flipped the lights on, and his breath hitched. They were still there. The Mustang, the Spitfire, the Corsair. It was all real. He spent the next hour simply walking among them, his awe growing with every detail he noticed. The precise riveting on the fuselages, the absence of a single speck of corrosion, the faint smell of fresh oil and rubber. The sheer quality of the work was breathtaking. But with the awe came a new, terrifying question. What now? He was the owner of 3 priceless historical artifacts. He was also a man who had 2 eggs in his fridge and 30 days to avoid homelessness. The disconnect was so vast it was dizzying. Who did you call when you found a secret Air Force under your dad's junkyard? He couldn't just call the local scrap dealer. He couldn't march into Mr. Henderson's bank and offer a Spitfire as collateral. He needed an expert, someone who understood what these machines were, who could appreciate them not just for their value but for their soul. More importantly, he needed someone discreet. The idea came to him as he watched Chloe drawing in her sketchbook back in the cabin. She was trying to capture the Corsair's bent wings, her brow furrowed in concentration. It reminded him of the air show, of the old men in veterans' caps who had gathered around the planes, speaking a language of Merlin engines and flight ceilings. And that triggered a memory, a piece of small-town gossip he'd overheard at the diner weeks ago. A couple of farmers were grumbling about that crazy old pilot, Arthur Pendleton, who lived out on the edge of town and apparently shouted at kids who flew drones too close to his property. He thinks he still owns the sky, one of them had grumbled. At the time, it was just background noise. Now, it was a beacon of hope. A pilot. A veteran. It was a long shot, but it was the only one he had. Finding Arthur Pendleton's house wasn't difficult. It was a small, immaculately neat cottage set far back from the road, a stark contrast to the chaos of the Carter property. The lawn was cut with military precision. Instead of a garden gnome, a beautifully detailed, large-scale model of a B-25 Mitchell bomber was mounted on a pole near the mailbox. Liam knew he was in the right place. He knocked on the door, his heart thudding a nervous rhythm. After a moment, the door opened a few inches, held by a chain. A pair of sharp, suspicious blue eyes peered out at him from a deeply lined face. "What do you want?" the man asked. His voice was gravelly, impatient. "Mr. Pendleton?" Liam began. "My name is Liam Carter. I need to talk to you about something. It's about airplanes." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "I'm not interested in buying anything, selling anything, or joining anything." "Good day." The door started to close. "No, wait," Liam said, a note of desperation in his voice. "Please, I'm Earl Carter's son. He passed away recently. I inherited his property off the old county road." Arthur paused, the door held ajar. He knew the property, everyone did. It was the town's landmark of eccentricity and decay. "Earl Carter's boy, eh? Heard he passed. Sorry for your loss. Still doesn't explain why you're on my porch." "My father," he collected things, Liam said, struggling to find the right words. "I found something. Something I think only a person like you would understand. It's not a story, it's real. I just need 5 minutes of your time." Arthur was a man who had heard every barn-find rumor in the county for 50 years. They were always a fantasy, a rusted-out crop duster, a pile of miscellaneous parts. He was about to send Liam packing, but something in the young man's eyes stopped him. It wasn't the glint of a schemer. It was the shell-shocked look of a man who had seen a ghost. "All right, Carter," Arthur sighed, unlatching the chain. "You have 2 minutes. Make them good." Liam didn't waste time with a long explanation. He knew words wouldn't be enough. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling slightly as he swiped to the photos he had taken that morning. He didn't show Arthur the whole plane at first. He showed him a single clear shot of the Corsair's cockpit, the complex array of dials and switches gleaming, the manufacturer's plate clearly visible. Arthur leaned in, squinting. His dismissive posture vanished. He took the phone from Liam's hand, his own hand surprisingly steady. His thumb zoomed in on the image. He stared at the gauges, the throttle quadrant, the gun sight. His breath caught. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a low, intense whisper. "It's there," Liam said, "on my father's property. There are two others." He swiped to the next photo, a close-up of the Spitfire's elliptical wingtip, the RAF roundel, vibrant and clear. Arthur's face went pale. He sank back against the doorframe, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. He looked from the screen to Liam, and for the first time he truly saw him. "I'll get my coat," Arthur said. The drive to the junkyard was silent. Arthur sat stiffly in the passenger seat of Liam's truck, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, his mind clearly racing. When they arrived, he surveyed the mountains of scrap with a practiced, critical eye, but said nothing. Liam led him past the cabin, toward the camouflaged hillock. When Arthur saw the open hatch, he stopped. "Good Lord, Earl," he murmured to himself. "What were you building?" He descended the steps slowly, cautiously, like a soldier entering a captured bunker. When he reached the bottom and Liam switched on the lights, Arthur froze. His jaw went slack. The cynical, gruff old pilot dissolved, replaced by a man gazing upon a holy sight. He didn't speak. He simply walked, his movements slow and reverent. He approached the Spitfire first. He ran a trembling hand along the smooth, cool metal of the wing, his fingers tracing the painted roundel. "My God," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I flew one of these, out of Biggin Hill, a Mike VB." He closed his eyes for a moment, lost in a memory half a century old. "I thought they were all gone, all the ones with real souls anyway." Ember. He moved from one plane to the next, his expert eyes missing nothing. He noted the authentic Goodyear tires on the Corsair, the Packard Merlin engine in the Mustang, the flawless canopy perspex on the Spitfire. He was no longer just seeing planes. He was reading them, appreciating the thousands of tiny, perfect details that screamed authenticity. Finally, Liam led him to the workbench and the metal box of documents. Arthur sat down heavily on a stool and began to read. He sifted through the logbooks, the restoration notes, the transfer deeds. His initial shock slowly transformed into a deep, professional awe. "Do you have any idea what your father did here?" he asked. His voice hushed. He held up a binder filled with photos of the Corsair, as it had been found a mangled, corroded wreck, sitting in a desert boneyard. "He didn't just restore these, son. He resurrected them. This level of craftsmanship, it's not mechanics work. This is artistry. There are maybe 5 people in the world who can do this kind of panel beating." He continued to sort through the papers, his excitement growing. "The provenance, it's all here. This Mustang flew with the 352nd Fighter Group, a genuine blue-nosed bastard of Bodney. This Spitfire is a photo reconnaissance model rare as hen's teeth. And the Corsair," he stopped, looking up at Liam, his eyes shining with an intense light. "This F4U1 Ampere is one of maybe a dozen left in the world that is this close to its original wartime configuration. It's a time capsule." Liam felt his knees go weak. "So, they're valuable?" he asked, the word feeling small and vulgar in the presence of such history. Arthur let out a short, sharp laugh. "Are they valuable? Son, is the Mona Lisa a nice painting?" He stood up and began to pace, energized. "To the right buyer, a serious museum or a top-tier collector like a Paul Allen or a Kermit Weeks, this collection is a bombshell. The Mustang, maybe 3 to 4 million. The Spitfire, easily the same. But the Corsair, in this condition, with these papers, it's the crown jewel. And all 3 together, as a single, secret collection, found this way?" He stopped pacing and looked directly at Liam. "Son, you're standing in a room with at least $15 million worth of history. And frankly," he added, tapping a logbook, "I think that's a conservative estimate. $15 million. The number was so immense, so abstract, it didn't even register at first. It was like trying to imagine the distance to a star." Liam leaned against the cool metal skin of the Mustang, the reality of his situation finally crashing down on him with the force of a tidal wave. The foreclosure, the empty cupboards, The years of struggle, it all seemed like a story from someone else's life. Arthur watched him, his expression softening from awe to a kind of paternal concern. He walked over and clapped a firm hand on Liam's shoulder. "Your father," Arthur said, his voice losing its gravelly edge. "I knew him, but I didn't know him. Nobody did. We all thought he was just an eccentric old junkman, but he wasn't. He was a guardian, a preserver of legends." He looked from Liam to the three magnificent warbirds filling the hangar. "And you, son," he said, his grip on Liam's shoulder tightening, "you are now the guardian of a national treasure." The 2 days following Arthur's appraisal were the strangest of Liam's life. He and Chloe existed in a surreal bubble, living in the dusty cabin, the secret hangar beneath their feet, a constant, thrumming presence. The number Arthur had quoted, $15 million, refused to solidify in Liam's mind. It was a phantom, a concept too vast to grasp. His reality was still the dwindling milk supply and the foreclosure notice, which he now used as a bookmark in his father's journal. On Arthur's stern advice, the first and only official step Liam took was to contact a lawyer. Not the small-town attorney who had handled the will, but a specialist Arthur knew of in Chicago, a man named Marcus Thorne, who dealt exclusively with high-value, unique assets like fine art, occasionally vintage aircraft. "You don't talk to anyone else, you understand me, son," Arthur had insisted, his voice sharp as a drill sergeant's. "Not the bank, not the papers, and especially not that smirking jackal of a neighbor you've got. A find like this attracts sharks. Marcus is the guy who builds the shark cage." The phone call with Thorne was brief and efficient. Liam, feeling out of his depth, simply stated the facts as Arthur had coached him. "I am the sole heir to my father's estate, which includes 3 fully restored, museum-quality World War II aircraft with complete documentation." There was a moment of profound silence on the other end of the line, the first time Liam had ever heard a lawyer sound speechless. Thorne quickly recovered, his voice shifting from professionally brisk to intensely focused. He asked for a few key details from the logbooks, which Liam provided, and promised to begin a discreet preliminary verification process immediately. That single phone call was the stone tossed into the placid, stagnant pond of Northwood, and the ripples began to spread with astonishing speed. The leak, when it came, was not from the tight-lipped Chicago lawyer. It started, as most things did in a small town, with a whisper of gossip. Marcus Thorne's initial verification process involved a query to the county records office to confirm the title of the Carter property. A junior clerk named Brenda, bored with her usual tasks of filing deeds and property liens, saw the query come in from a high-powered Chicago law firm regarding the old Carter junkyard. Her curiosity piqued. She mentioned it to her mother during their lunch break at the town diner. "Isn't that strange?" she'd said. "A big-shot lawyer looking into that old dump. What could they possibly want with that place?" Her mother mentioned it to the waitress, who mentioned it to a farmer at the counter, who mentioned it to his brother-in-law, who happened to be a part-time stringer for the regional newspaper. Within 48 hours, the vague rumor of a big-city lawyer had ignited a firestorm of speculation. The story mutated with each retelling. The junkyard wasn't just a junkyard. Old man Carter had found gold. He'd been a counterfeiter. He was a fugitive hiding out. The definitive match that lit the fuse, however, came from the sky. Thorne, as part of his due diligence, had hired a satellite imaging company to get a high-resolution photograph of the property. He wanted to see the layout, to check for any obvious environmental issues. The resulting image, however, picked up a faint thermal anomaly around the area of the bunker, a pocket of subterranean air that was a fraction of a degree warmer than the surrounding Earth. The analyst at the imaging company, an aviation enthusiast himself, recognized the junkyard's location from a message board where pilots sometimes discuss strange local landmarks. He cross-referenced it with the legal query and made a wildly intuitive leap. He posted an anonymous, speculative message on a popular forum for warbird aficionados, hearing chatter about a major undiscovered collection in central Northwood County. 3 fighters, B-50, Uno, Spit, Corsair. Anyone else? The internet did the rest. The post exploded. Within hours, the rumor was no longer a rumor. It was a fact, embellished and magnified into a legend. Liam and Chloe were completely oblivious, still sequestered in their secret world. The first sign that their bubble had burst came in the form of a phone call to Liam's cell. It was an unknown number. "Liam, my boy, it's Bill Henderson." The voice was no longer the cold, flat monotone of a banker. It was a syrupy, booming baritone, dripping with false bonhomie. "Just calling to check in on you. Heard you came into a bit of a windfall. Wonderful, wonderful news. Now, when you're thinking about how to manage those new assets, you remember who your friends are. First Community Bank offers a full suite of wealth management and advisory services." Liam stood frozen, the phone pressed to his ear. How did he know? He mumbled a non-committal response and hung up, a feeling of dread creeping up his spine. The second sign was Gary. Liam had driven into town for supplies, leaving Chloe with a very stern Arthur standing guard. As he came out of the grocery store, he saw Gary nearly run a red light to pull his SUV over to the curb. "Liam, pal, buddy," Gary shouted, jogging over. His face wore a smile so wide and unnatural it looked painful. "I heard the news. It's incredible. Man, I always knew you had it in you. Always. That quiet confidence, you know?" Liam just stared at him, speechless. "Listen," Gary went on, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I know this is all new to you. You're going to have people coming out of the woodwork, trying to take advantage. You need a partner, someone you can trust, a local guy to help you manage things. I've got a head for business. We could turn that junkyard into a first-class tourist attraction." The whiplash from being offered a job at the car wash just days earlier to this desperate, fawning partnership proposal was so extreme that Liam could only blink. He pushed his cart past Gary, loaded his groceries into his truck, and drove away, leaving his neighbor standing on the sidewalk with his mouth still open. By the time he got back to the property, the invasion had begun. A white news van from a regional television station was parked at the gate. A reporter with a microphone was trying to get a dramatic shot through the chain-link fence. Two other cars were parked behind the van, their occupants strangers with hungry, curious eyes peering in. "This is it," Arthur said grimly as Liam pulled up. "The circus has come to town." And de furore. The pressure that had been a vague, internal anxiety was now an external, physical force. Liam felt the walls closing in. He was no longer just a broke father trying to save his home. He had been transformed, without his consent, into a public spectacle, the Junkyard millionaire. The label felt like a cheap costume he was being forced to wear. They retreated to the cabin, locking the door and drawing the dusty curtains. The phone began to ring incessantly. It was his cell phone this time, his number apparently dredged up from some public record. There were calls from reporters, from distant cousins he hadn't heard from in 20 years, from financial advisors, from insurance salesmen, from self-proclaimed aviation experts offering their services. Each call was a fresh wave of pressure, a new demand on a fortune that still felt entirely unreal. He turned the phone off. He and Chloe sat in the dim light of the cabin, the sounds of the outside world muffled but persistent. They could hear cars driving slowly past the gate, the occasional shout of a reporter. The 12 acres that had been his father's sanctuary had become a fishbowl. "Why are all those people here, Daddy?" Chloe asked, her voice small. She had her sketchbook open, but she wasn't drawing. Liam looked at her, at the fear and confusion in her eyes, and a new kind of anger took root in him. It wasn't the old bitter resentment toward his father. It was a fierce, protective anger. His father had built this place, this secret world, to protect a legacy and ultimately to provide for them. And now the outside world, with its greed and its noise, was clawing at the gates, trying to tear it apart. "They're here because of the secret, Pumpkin," he said, pulling her into a hug. "But they don't understand it, not like we do." And he looked around the cabin, at the schematics on the wall and the manuals on the shelf. He thought of the quiet, magnificent hangar below. This place, which he had once despised as a symbol of everything that had been wrong in his life, now felt like the only safe harbor in a sudden, violent storm. It was more than just a collection of valuable assets. It was his father's life, his story. And Liam realized with absolute clarity that his new job wasn't just to manage the money. It was to protect the legacy. The arrival of the professionals marked a definitive shift. 2 days after the media circus began, a discreet black sedan with tinted windows rolled up to the gate, navigating past a lingering news van with an air of complete authority. Marcus Thorne, the Chicago lawyer, stepped out. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his 50s, with a calm, reassuring demeanor that was the complete opposite of the chaos surrounding the property. With him were two other people. One was a woman named Dr. Alistair Finch, a senior curator from the National Air and Space Museum. The other was a quiet, older gentleman named Elias Vance, one of the world's most respected appraisers of vintage aircraft. They weren't sharks. They were the arbiters of history, the people who wrote it down. Arthur was there to greet them, standing beside Liam as a grizzled, protective gatekeeper. Introductions were made, and Liam, feeling like an imposter in his own story, led the small, official party down into the hangar. The reaction of the experts was far quieter than Liam's own had been, yet infinitely more profound. As the lights flickered on, Dr. Finch simply put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer academic disbelief. Elias Vance, the appraiser, slowly removed his glasses and began polishing them with a handkerchief, a gesture that Liam sensed was a way to process a sight that his decades of experience had never prepared him for. "My word, Earl," Vance murmured, shaking his head in wonder. "You actually did it." They spent the next 4 hours conducting a meticulous inspection. They didn't just look, they examined. Vance produced a small magnetic scanner to measure the thickness of the paint, confirming it was consistent with period application techniques. Dr. Finch cross-referenced the logbooks with the museum's own extensive digital archives on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. They spoke in a quiet, technical shorthand with Arthur, debating the merits of a particular wiring harness or the authenticity of a cockpit instrument. Liam and Chloe watched from the side, feeling like spectators at an event of immense importance that was happening in a language they didn't fully understand. Finally, the four experts gathered around the workbench. "Well, Liam," Dr. Finch began, her voice filled with a quiet reverence, "Arthur's initial assessment was not just accurate. He may have been conservative. This isn't merely a collection, it's a snapshot. To have these 3 specific aircraft, all restored by the same hand to this unparalleled standard, with this level of unbroken provenance, it's unprecedented. The valuation is complex," Elias Vance added, his voice raspy with emotion. "Individually, they are worth a fortune. The Spitfire and the Mustang are top-tier examples. But the Corsair, this specific 1-ampere model, is the holy grail for naval aviation collectors. As a single, unified collection, its historical significance multiplies its monetary value exponentially. A public auction would be a global event." Liam's heart pounded. He thought of the foreclosure notice, of Chloe's worn-out shoes, of a lifetime of just getting by. The temptation to simply take the highest bid, to cash out and solve every problem he'd ever had, was immense. But then he looked at the workbench where his father's journal lay open. He had spent the last 2 nights reading it from cover to cover, absorbing the decades of sacrifice and obsession poured into these machines. His father hadn't done this for the money. He had done it for the history, for the memory of the men who flew them, for the honor of his own father. To simply sell them off to the highest bidder felt like a betrayal of that sacred purpose. He wouldn't have wanted them separated, Liam said, his own voice surprising him with its firmness. And he wouldn't have wanted them locked away in a private hangar for only one person to see. Dr. Finch's eyes lit up with a spark of hope. "What did you have in mind?" Guided by a new, clear sense of purpose, Liam laid out his plan, a plan that had been forming in his mind as he'd read his father's words. He looked at Marcus Thorne, the lawyer. "I want to sell 2 of the planes, the Spitfire and the Corsair, to the museum. I want a fair price, but more importantly, I want conditions." "And afraid," Thorne raised an eyebrow. "What sort of conditions?" "First," Liam said, "they must be displayed together as the Carter Collection. And second, my father's name, Earl Carter, must be featured permanently on the exhibit as the sole restorer. People need to know who did this. Not the reclusive junkman, but the artist." Dr. Finch was nodding enthusiastically. "That would be our honor, Liam. Absolutely." "There's one more thing," Liam added, looking at the gleaming P-51 Mustang. "I'm keeping the Mustang." A silence fell over the group. The Mustang was the most iconic of the 3, the American hero. "It was the first one he found," Liam explained, his voice thick with emotion. "He called her his lady. It's the one he poured the most of himself into. It's my connection to him. I want to keep it. And I want to fly it." "Goaded back. Crosso. One and so." Arthur grinned, a wide, proud smile. The negotiation that followed was unlike any Marcus Thorne had ever conducted. It was less about haggling over millions and more about forging a partnership. A price was agreed upon for the Spitfire and the Corsair, a sum so vast it remained an abstract concept in Liam's mind, a string of zeros on a piece of paper. The museum also agreed, as part of the deal, to provide their world-class expertise and technical support to help Liam and Arthur get the Mustang fully flight certified under modern FAA regulations. It was the deal of a lifetime, one that honored both the past and the future. 2 weeks later, the transaction was complete. The world outside the junkyard gate was still buzzing with rumors, but inside, a quiet, monumental shift had occurred. Liam Carter was no longer a man on the brink of foreclosure. His first stop was the First Community Bank of Northwood. He walked in, not with the stooped shoulders of a supplicant, but with the quiet confidence of a man in control of his own destiny. He didn't ask to see Mr. Henderson. He walked straight up to the head teller, a woman who had looked through him with pity 100 times before. Today, she looked at him with undisguised awe. "I'd like to pay off the mortgage on my property," Liam said calmly. "In full." He wrote out the check without fanfare and pushed it across the counter. From his office at the back of the bank, Mr. Henderson watched the entire exchange, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Liam met his gaze through the glass, gave a slight, formal nod, and walked out, the jingle of the bell on the door sounding like a note of finality. His second encounter was less formal but equally significant. He was at the local hardware store, buying a set of high-quality locks for the hangar. As he stood in the checkout line, the door opened and Gary walked in. Gary saw him and froze, a deer caught in the headlights. The usual smirk was gone, replaced by a nervous, uncertain expression. "Liam," he said, his voice strained. "Hey, how's everything?" "Everything's fine, Gary," Liam replied, his tone neutral, polite. Yeah, that's great," Gary stammered, fumbling with a display of zip ties. "Listen, man, about, the other day. I was just kidding around. Just neighborly ribbing, Liam looked at him. He saw a man who was small, not because of his finances, but because of his spirit. He felt no anger, no desire for revenge. Vengeance was a luxury he couldn't afford and no longer wanted. He was beyond it. The world of petty jealousies and small-town mockery had shrunk to an insignificant dot in his rearview mirror. "Don't worry about it," Liam said. He paid for his locks and walked past Gary. "Have a good day." As he left the store, he felt a profound sense of lightness. He hadn't just paid off a financial debt. He had settled a deeper, emotional one. He had stepped out of the shadow of other people's judgments. He had his father's legacy to protect and a future to build for his daughter. He had no more time for ghosts. The 6 months that followed the deal with the museum were a blur of transformation. The Carter property, for so long a symbol of stagnation and decay, became a hive of purposeful activity. The first, most cathartic change was the dismantling of the junkyard itself. Liam didn't just hire a crew. He oversaw the process himself, with a surprising aptitude for logistics he never knew he possessed. He sold the mountains of scrap metal for a handsome sum, but he approached it not as a junk man, but as his father's son. He sorted through the debris with care, pulling aside interesting pieces of machinery and antique engines that he felt Earl would have wanted to save. The rest was hauled away in a seemingly endless parade of long bed trucks, and with each load that departed, it felt as though a physical weight was being lifted from the land and from Liam's own soul. As the ground was cleared, revealing the rich earth that had been buried for decades, 2 new structures began to rise. The first was a house. It wasn't the sprawling mansion that Gary had probably imagined, but a beautiful, modern, and practical home, designed with clean lines, large windows, and a wide porch. It was a house built for a future, not as a monument to wealth. Chloe was given rein to design her own bedroom, which ended up with a sky-blue ceiling covered in glow in the dark stars. The second structure, built next to the house, was a professional-grade climate-controlled hangar for the P-51 Mustang. It was a state-of-the-art facility, far superior to the secret bunker, with specialized lighting, a workshop that would have made Earl weep with joy, and large doors that opened onto a newly paved private runway that stretched across the back of the property. The old, dilapidated cabin was left standing, preserved as a historical artifact, a humble origin story for the grand legend it had concealed. But Liam's vision extended beyond his own property lines. One afternoon, he drove to Northwood Community College, a small, underfunded institution that offered vocational training. He met with the college president, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, and made a proposal that left her speechless. He established a perpetual endowment, the single largest donation in the college's history. It wasn't to be named after him. It was to be called the Earl Carter Grant for the Mechanical Arts. It was a full-ride scholarship, awarded each year to students who, like his father, showed a passion and an aptitude for working with their hands: welders, mechanics, machinists, and engineers. It was Liam's way of permanently rewriting his father's legacy. Earl Carter would no longer be remembered as the town eccentric. He would be the patron saint of every kid who preferred a wrench to a textbook. Amidst all this construction and philanthropy, Liam embarked on his own, more personal project, learning to fly. Arthur Pendleton, who had been drifting into a quiet, lonely retirement, found a vibrant new purpose in life. He became Liam's mentor, his drill sergeant, and his closest confidant. The process began not in the air, but on the ground, in the new hangar, with the Mustang herself. "You don't just fly a warbird," Arthur declared on their first day, slapping the Mustang's propeller hub. "You have to know her. You have to speak her language. You need to know what every pop, every shudder, every change in pitch from that Merlin engine means." Their days were spent with their heads deep in the Mustang's engine bay. Arthur taught Liam how to check the magnetos, clean the spark plugs, and read the subtle signs of a healthy engine. Liam, who had always resented the grease and oil of his father's world, discovered he had an innate mechanical aptitude. His hands, accustomed to hard work, learned the feel of a properly torqued bolt. He was not just learning about the plane, he was connecting with his father on a level that had been impossible in life. He could almost feel Earl's presence beside him, nodding in silent approval. The actual flight training began in a much smaller, more forgiving aircraft, a two-seater Cessna that Arthur rented from a nearby airfield. The first time Arthur let him take the controls, the feeling was terrifying and exhilarating. The world, which had always been a thing he walked upon, became something he could rise above. Arthur was a demanding teacher. He barked corrections, drilled emergency procedures relentlessly, and forced Liam to practice stalls and recoveries until his knuckles were white. But beneath the gruff exterior was a deep-seated desire to see Liam succeed. "Your father restored this plane to be flown," Arthur said one evening as they sat on the hangar steps, watching the sunset. "Keeping it on the ground is like keeping a Stradivarius in a locked case. It's an insult to the artist who made it." As his skills in the air grew, Liam's understanding of his father deepened on the ground. One rainy afternoon, unable to fly, he sat in the quiet of the old cabin and decided to finish reading Earl's journal. He turned to the last few pages, the entries more sporadic, the handwriting growing weaker. The final entry wasn't dated. It was a letter. "To my son, Liam. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have found my secret. I hope that you are not reading it with anger. I know I was not the father you deserved. I see now, at the end of things, that I was a man possessed. This project, which started as a tribute to my own father and the men he served with, became a beast that consumed me. It was my sanctuary and my prison. I was never good with words, son. I was good with my hands. I could make a broken engine sing, but I couldn't find the right way to tell you I was proud of you. I couldn't bridge the gap between my world of oil and metal and your world of school and baseball games. And for that failure, I am truly and deeply sorry. I knew you saw this all as junk. In a way, you were right. It's all just metal and wire. But it's also history. It's courage and sacrifice shaped into a machine. And I hoped it would be your future. I couldn't give you a normal life. I couldn't give you the time and attention you deserved. But I hoped that the fruits of my obsession, this strange inheritance, could give you and your family something I never had. Freedom. The freedom from want, the freedom to choose your own path, the freedom to fly. Don't mourn me, son. Just look up at the sky every now and then. That's where the best parts of me always were. Your father, Earl." Liam closed the journal, his tears falling onto the worn leather cover. The last vestiges of his childhood hurt washed away, replaced by a wave of profound, complicated love for the father he had only truly gotten to know after he was gone. Earl hadn't been choosing junk over him. In his own flawed, silent way, he had been doing all of this for him. The planes weren't the barrier that had stood between them. They were the bridge, the message in a bottle he had spent a lifetime preparing. A few weeks later, the day finally came. Liam passed his final check ride with a stern-faced FAA examiner. He was officially a licensed pilot with a special type rating for high-performance, tail-dragger aircraft. He had done the work. He was ready. He walked into the hangar where Arthur and Chloe were waiting. The P-51 Mustang Street Hood gleaming under the lights, her fuel tanks topped off, looking more like a living creature than a machine. "She's ready when you are, Captain," Arthur said, a rare, wide smile splitting his face. Liam took a deep breath. He was ready to accept the final piece of his inheritance. The day of the first flight dawned clear and bright, the sky a vast, cloudless expanse of cobalt blue. It was a perfect day. In the hangar, the air hummed with a quiet, electric anticipation. The great doors were rolled open, and the P-51 Mustang was towed out onto the fresh tarmac, its polished silver skin drinking in the morning sun. It looked magnificent, not a museum piece behind a velvet rope, but a thoroughbred poised for the race. Liam did the pre-flight check himself, his movements slow, deliberate, and deeply ingrained from months of practice with Arthur watching over his shoulder. Today, however, Arthur stood back with Chloe, observing with a quiet pride. Liam ran his hands over the smooth rivets of the wing, checked the fuel sumps, and inspected the control surfaces, his touch both a pilot's and a son's. He was communing with the machine and with the ghost of the man who had given it a second life. Finally, it was time. He hugged Chloe tightly. "You be good for Arthur, okay? I'll be back before you know it." "Do a barrel roll," she shouted excitedly, her voice full of the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child who had only ever seen this as a magical adventure. Liam laughed. "Maybe next time, Pumpkin." He then turned to Arthur. The old pilot's eyes were glistening. He clapped a firm, steady hand on Liam's shoulder. "Remember your training. Feel the plane, don't just fly it. Your father would be so damn proud of you, son." Liam nodded, his throat too tight for words. He climbed up onto the wing and settled into the cockpit. The smell of leather and high-octane fuel was intoxicating. This was his father's office. He strapped himself into the complex harness, the clicks of the buckles echoing in the cockpit. He looked out at his new home, at the hangar, and at the two most important people in his life watching him from the edge of the runway. His past and his future, all in one place. With a deep breath, he began the startup sequence, his hands moving with practiced confidence over the switches and levers. "Clear prop," he shouted, his voice steady. With the press of a button, the massive propeller coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with a sound that was pure, thunderous music. The Packard Merlin engine settled into a rumbling, powerful idle, the entire airframe vibrating with contained energy. It was the sound of history waking up. He taxied the Mustang down the runway, the tail-dragger configuration demanding his full attention. He lined up with the center line, did a final check of his instruments, and pushed the throttle forward. The acceleration was breathtaking. He was pushed back into his seat as the Mustang devoured the runway, the roar of the engine consuming the world. With a gentle pullback on the stick, the plane lifted off the ground, light and graceful, defying its own immense weight and power. He was flying. The world fell away beneath him. The junkyard, now a neat and orderly homestead, shrank in moments. The town of Northwood, with its bank and its hardware store, became a tiny, insignificant grid on the landscape. He climbed, the Mustang effortlessly ascending into the vastness of the sky, and for the first time, Liam felt the freedom his father had written about. It was absolute. He flew for nearly an hour, getting a feel for the Mustang's incredible responsiveness. It was a perfectly balanced machine, an extension of his own will. He soared over the green fields and winding rivers, a silver speck against the endless blue. All the small worries, the petty grievances, the years of struggle, they had no place up here. There was only the roar of the engine, the feel of the controls, and the incredible, humbling beauty of the world seen from above. He made two passes that held special significance. First, he flew over the Northwood Community College, dipping his wings in a silent salute to the generations of future mechanics who would get their start because of a reclusive junkman. Then, he turned toward the town cemetery. He circled once, high above, spotting the small, simple headstone that marked his father's grave. He brought the Mustang down lower, the shadow of its iconic wings passing over the manicured grass. He dipped his left wing again, a final, personal message to the man who had given him the sky. "I understand now, Dad, thank you." As he leveled out and began the journey home, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, as profound and deep as the sky itself. He was no longer just Liam Carter, the struggling father. He wasn't the junkyard millionaire. He was Earl Carter's son, a pilot, a guardian of a legacy, and the master of his own destiny. His landing was smooth, the wheels kissing the tarmac with a gentle chirp. As he taxied back toward the hangar, he saw Chloe and Arthur waiting, their faces beaming. He shut down the engine, and the sudden silence was as profound as the earlier noise. He climbed out of the cockpit, his legs a little shaky, his heart full to bursting. Chloe ran to him, and he lifted her into a massive hug, burying his face in her hair. "How was it, Daddy?" she asked, her voice muffled against his flight suit. Liam looked over her head at the magnificent airplane, then at the home they had built, and finally at the open sky. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "It was like coming home, Pumpkin," he said. "It was like finally coming home." Thank you for joining us on this journey with Liam and Chloe. The greatest legacies are often hidden, not just under junk, but under our own misunderstandings. It sometimes takes a lifetime to read the message a loved one leaves behind. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Do you think Liam made the right choice in keeping the Mustang? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of hope, discovery, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit, please make sure to subscribe to UpStory and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support allows us to keep telling these stories. Thank you for watching.